Thank you, Presiding Officer. This is my first opportunity to speak in a parliamentary debate since this crisis began. So I'd like to put on record my thanks to the many workers in my region, who I know have been working on the front line in the most difficult of circumstances. I know of the personal tragedy that the virus has brought to many of us and the lasting effect it is having on all of us on our physical and mental health. And I think many outside of the Chamber will ask why we need these emergency bills to progress through Parliament with such haste and in the absence of normal consultation, and also in place of what I suspect is now a lengthy backlog of bills that both the government and members would rather be progressing through the Chamber, or in some cases not. And I think scrutiny, which becomes routine to the seasoned legislator, to the outside world is still important, as is manifested by the volume of briefings and letters that we get when a bill arrives in our desks. This bill is no different. In normal times, the government of the day will present its programme for government, and it will use legislation to deliver those policy intentions, whether we agree or not with those intentions. But this bill instead is reacting to the circumstances which we face, which are unforeseen and indeed unwelcome. But whatever we pass here today, it must help those who need it most. The shift has moved from the normal economic, statistical debates that I think we're all guilty of, the politics of government and the politics of opposition, instead to a debate about the fragility of our health, physical, and in this case, financial. We've put much needed human faces to the often theoretic and mundane nature of legislation. The feedback from the Equality and Human Rights Commission of Scotland on our work today was quite striking. They said, "We know that vulnerable and disadvantaged people are most at risk from this virus. So an equality-driven approach which considers the needs of different groups at the outset will ensure that actions are not only inclusive but effective. Now, we all have a duty to scrutinise this legislation, a task not being made easy by the circumstances we are in, but I ask that we keep that advice in the back of our minds. Our actions must be inclusive, not just effective." And as technical as the measures in this bill are, what we do pass affects real people in the real world. This crisis has reminded us all of the privilege and the gravity of passing law. This pandemic also means we must make significant changes to our legal frameworks, and some of these changes are uncomfortable and would not be acceptable in normal times, but these are not normal times. We lend our support to government to give it the required powers that it needs to deal with the crisis, on the principles of temporality and trust. Trust in ministers to use those powers responsibly, and trust that they will use them proportionally. And then in turn, the general public trust us to judge that balance. Much has been said on the specifics of the bill, but I'd like to pick up two specific issues. The first around the issue of bankruptcy. The impact on business and the economy is something we talk about a lot. We've all had unsettling correspondence from individuals and businesses who are worried about their future. Today we found out the economy has already contracted by 2%. Unprecedented measures have had to have been taken to protect incomes and protect jobs. Measures the likes of which I think surprised some even on my side of the political spectrum, no least those in another. The Chancellor yesterday extended the furlough scheme until October, something welcomed by the front benches today in the Chamber. But the elephant in the room is that not everyone will financially reach the other side of this. Many people are genuinely worried about their finances and their livelihoods. We are some of the lucky ones. We cannot underestimate the debt crisis that is lurking around the corner on the other side of these dark days. The debt issue is real. If you've gone from being in a well-paid job to being made redundant through no fault of your own or that of your company, it comes as a physical and mental shock. There's no doubt about that. Your income has reduced, but your outgoings do not. The credit cards, the store cards, the bank loans, the car finance, the tax returns, and those are just credit. The physical outgoings continue: utility bills, rent, taxes, overheads, and the same can be said for individuals as well as businesses. And when this crisis recedes, the debate that we need to be having is not just about the fees that we charge for bankruptcy or how we allow electronic meetings of creditors reverting to physical meetings. We need to have a grown-up conversation about how we tackle COVID-related bankruptcy per se. The other area of this bill that I'd like to briefly touch on are the proposed changes to statutory deadlines and reporting. What is expected of legislators during times of national emergency? Just as the government that led during world wars was the government's priority to tackle what was facing them at the time, our invisible enemy gives some parallels to how we govern today. The fact that government could still be held to account then maintained that vital public faith and trust in the extraordinary powers that government needed and government was granted. I have general uneasiness with Section 4 of this bill, which seeks to modify duties on the government and how it prepares and reports to us. Just as we had in the last debate on freedom of information, it is up to the government to make the case to us why there is a need for these provisions. And my view is that that case has not yet been made. The current crisis cannot be the go-to explanation for everything when asked difficult questions. I accept that resource must be redeployed. I accept that the civil service is working in new ways, but it's fundamentally important that the government cannot use the workload of its advisors as a means to avoid scrutiny. There are facts and figures which government must collate, it must track, it must publish, and indeed it must defend. Life has changed, but life must go on. Scrutiny has changed, but scrutiny must go on. In closing, Presiding Officer, the government will enjoy our support in the extraordinary times and the extraordinary measures that it asks for, but it pushes that consensus at its peril.